What's going on? It's your boy DameSmiff, and today we're going to have a quick conversation about leniency and how harsh the United States legal system can be, especially for entertainers and musicians. So if you are interested in conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button and also subscribe, because that'll let people know that this video was cool to you. And then you can also catch my latest videos if you hit the subscribe button. So a lot of the times when we think about, like, let's say like the legal system, repeat offenders, and rock star lifestyles and drugs and women and all this cool stuff, right? We assume that it comes with its level of immunity to the law, right? We think like, oh well, they're getting away with it because they're famous or because they're rich or something like that, right? But recently we've been seeing a lot of, I guess you can say, or a lack of continuity and consistency in how a lot of people do get charged, and what we would consider, I guess, common sense when it comes to how laws are even enforced, right? And so when I like to think of different situations, most of the time I think of a celebrity, an entertainer, but other times I think of like regular people and how they would be pitted against the same system and what would happen and what options do they occur. Basically, what would happen if I was facing a similar charge as like a celebrity. And so a lot of the times we've seen all the headlines: a superstar gets arrested on a Friday, and by Monday they're posting a snippet of a new track from a private jet, and it feels like the law for them is just like a suggested guideline. But then you hear about the local artists, the ones on the verge, maybe like it's a rapper in the hood or something like that, and they're on a breakthrough, but they just disappear for 5 years and we don't really know what's going on with them. And it's usually something as simple as like a drug charge, right? But in this kind of like idea and this mindset that I'm thinking about, I really want to kind of take it off of musicians for a split second, and then I just want to look at it kind of like on a drone level over top type of view, right? And so my question is, like, is the US legal system too lenient on repeat offenders or celebrities, and is it too unforgiving to the musicians who don't have a fan base to scream for their release? And today we're going to look at this phenomenon, I guess you can say, that I'm going to call the influence gap. And we're breaking down how fame isn't just a lifestyle, it's a legal strategy. Okay. And so many times when I'm thinking of most of the people that kind of get away with things in the law, my mind goes to, oh, they must have, outsmarted the system, or at least, was able to prove their innocence in some way. But as I'm, experiencing more and more, I guess you can say, opportunities to learn about cases and how the law works, what I'm noticing is that there is a lot of human, I guess you can say, participation and free will that's imposed upon our law and our legal system here. So let's address the elephant in the room, right? The perception that the system is soft. To a lot of people, when they see a musician catch their third or fourth charge and still avoid prison, it feels like a failure of the justice system. But many people, they think of the lenient sentencing as if there's no real consequences. So there's really no deterrent as to like why you shouldn't do the cool things or the bad things that people all want to do, right? That puts them in jail. And so for a repeat offender, a slap on the wrist isn't a second chance. It's a permission to keep going, right? And so in the music world, street cred can sometimes be monetized, meaning a court case can actually increase a star's streaming numbers. If the system basically doesn't understand what you guys are commodifying, it may reward you depending on how you look at it, right? And so there's not really a hard stop that's going to happen for people that are looking for specific outcomes. And so we're going to have to really focus on who's going to be getting the most value from the fame and things like that. And a lot of times when I think of cases, I think of like when I was younger, Jay-Z was going through a court case, R. Kelly was going through a court case. Yeah, a lot of different people, but it seemed like exciting. It didn't seem like a negative thing for them, right? Whereas if, someone in my immediate family or like a friend of mine was in court, I'd be kind of like taking this a lot more serious about like what the possible outcomes could be for them. So there's a weird kind of phenomenon that we have when it comes to people we like going to court and people we don't really know going to court. But there is another side to this, right? For every superstar with a dream team of lawyers, right? Like the Jay-Z's and stuff like that, or even Young Thug, they had, crazy lawyers. There is 1,000 artists living under the weight of mandatory minimums, right? So you got to think of like people like yourself, myself, people who can like afford just enough legal counsel. You know what I'm saying? Like you can just barely get by, right? And this is where the law becomes a blunt instrument. In the federal system, certain charges, especially firearms or non-violent drug offenses, have floors, bottoms. A judge cannot go lower even if they want to, right? So for a musician, a 5-year mandatory sentence isn't just time served, it's a death sentence to their career in some instances. Like if you were just getting out of college or something like that, and you're college age and you're pretty much starting to grow into your career's rhythm, your flow, you're starting to create music and collaborate people. Just imagine having to stop doing all of that for 5 years, no work, right? And so that could be a death sentence, 5 years, and you have to restart and basically hope that your influence will maintain throughout that time, right? And then there's lyrics as evidence that's being used as a trap for many people, right? We're seeing more cases where creative expression, rap lyrics, music videos, when people do finger guns and they want to bang bang and walk around with all their homies with their little shirts and their letters and throwing up their twisted fingers and stuff, and they look real cool and awesome, right? But these things represent something, right? And so there is a huge discrepancy between like what that is and what we think it is, right? And so it is used to prove intent or character sometimes in these cases. So if you're supposed to be a family man and you're walking around throwing up fingers and tattoos and stuff like that, but on Instagram you're walking around with kids and a baby, it's like we can't really figure out who you are, right? And I always talk about this, especially for musicians and entertainers. You need to control who you say you are, right? If you want to be a female rapper and you want to be freak nasty, you need to stand on that. You can't be hiding behind any kind of other mask. If you're going to be super tough guy, you're going to deal with super tough guy problems. So you need to stand on that type of persona, right? And actually be it. For one, that would help. So it says when your art is used to lock you up, the system isn't just harsh, it's targeting, okay? So a lot of times we don't really understand what's happening to us because we think we're just playing the game. We're just keeping it real, right? But if you need to kind of close the gap on what you think is happening to you and why you think what's happening to you, and it doesn't really make sense, then what you should do is look towards the history of what you're doing. And I'll give you an example. Dancing, and a lot of things like that. Dancers have a lot of layers to the history of what dance is, what it's used for, and who's supposed to, and what it's meant for, and all this stuff, right? For many people, their participation is more of the priority than the education of dance and even music, right? And so you'll get a lot of people that will join groups, learn moves. They will start advocating for certain groups and ideas and things like that, void of any type of information or the entire thorough understanding of information when it comes to things that they need to understand, right? So when you ask people questions about like the history of certain moves, certain techniques, you start asking people the history of certain, I guess you can say, genres, especially within dance, there is usually some kind of historical context that goes beyond where you may have learned it from. So unless you've literally learned your dancing style from, let's say, a religion or a tradition that comes from a group bigger than you, 9 times out of 10, you are learning a piece of history, barely a fraction. So if you want to take hip hop dancing, for an instance, that's only a piece of history that comes with the overarching dance genre that hip hop encompasses. When you think of salsa, all of the history that comes with salsa. When you think of hula dancing, a lot of different things come together in layers, and it's thousands of layers deep. And so for many people, this kind of understanding, it takes effort. And so the participation part is just more fun for you to just be I don't know, if you're a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old person and you want to learn how to dance and you're in school dancing, to sit down and learn all of that history takes effort and takes time. And for most people, it's just easier just to try it out and have fun and do things, right? And so what I'm explaining is you can then find yourself in a situation where you're calling yourself a dancer. You say you represent certain things, you stand for certain opinions and ideas, right? But then when you get challenged, you don't really have substance on anything to withstand or substantiate your points, your beliefs, and your arguments. And a lot of times that can come in the instance of, why do you dance this way? Where did you learn this from? And things like that. And so if you don't have these understandings, you aren't really an arbiter of creation. You're kind of an emulation of what you think something is, right? And so that all comes together for us to understand, well, if I want to be a musician, but at the same time, I want to commit crimes and I want to do drugs. I want to hang with people that also do drugs. These people around me, they're carrying illegal firearms. My friends like to speed when they drive. Think for a second what kind of result you will get and why do these people exist in your career path for you to get to where you want to be. Now, if you don't do that, you're going to fall victim to the historical issues that have come with dealing with these things, either as a musician or a regular person. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do this together. We're going to highlight two different cases, right? Two. We're going to do one here where there's a high profile person who's going through a similar issue of another person that is not as high profile, but their ideas of who they are very similar, but their outcomes are going to be very different, right? But the reason they're very different is because of who these people kept around them and their understanding of what they're doing, okay? This is why I correlated this to dancers, meaning like if you just want to go around and just dance salsa music and don't understand why you're dancing it, when we ask you to substantiate why you do what you're doing, it's going to fall to just, I want to do it, right? But if we suddenly made salsa dancing illegal, would you stop? Right? But if it was really built into you, it was in your blood to do this kind of dancing, and we suddenly made it illegal, would you stop? Right? So this is the point that I'm trying to bring here. For certain people, they are thugs. They are tough guys. They are going to break the law, but then they also are musicians. But at the same time, they need to be met with the consequences of our United States legal system, right? But how does that work consistently if we enjoy only the music and not so much the thuggy tough guy part? Okay, so now we're going to see how this works. We're going to see how it works because we think we understand the law in general, right? We think we know what we're doing when we say, oh man, they're famous or they're rich, that's why they get to just do what they want and be free. Well, let's see, all right? So to see how this works in real time, we got to look at the influence gap itself. So take Young Thug. In 2024, a massive RICO trial happened. Basically, he received 15 years probation, and part of his deal was that he has to use his voice giving anti-gang presentations to youth in Atlanta. The court traded prison time for his platform. And then we're also going to compare that to Nigel Fredo Harvey, a co-defendant in a similar RICO case. Nigel doesn't have 10 million monthly listeners. He was sentenced to 20 years with 15 to be served behind bars. Same state, similar charges, but the difference, the court saw Thug as a public utility and Nigel as a statistic. So we see in federal cases too, like Kodak Black, he had his sentence commuted by the president in 2021. But meanwhile, the average federal defendant facing similar firearm charges serves about 71 months for the average Joe musician. There's no presidential out, there's no clock, right? So let's take a look at here. We're gonna pull up Young Thug's case, okay? And so I went ahead and used my AI brain because I'm super smart, and we pulled up the RICO case itself. And so we're going to take a quick snapshot at it, and then we're going to look at Nigel's case, and then we're going to just use our brain and see what we think about the two cases, because unless you're a lawyer yourself, we're really just going to look at this with our brains and see what we come up with. So the RICO case involving Young Thug Mr. Jeffrey Williams, and the YSL Young Slime Life Collective is widely considered one of the most high profile and complex legal battles in the history of hip hop and the state of Georgia. Here's the snapshot and its final resolution. So, in May 2022, Jeffrey Williams, Young Thug, was indicted along 27 other associates in a sweeping 56 count RICO indictment. The prosecution, led by Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis, alleged that YSL, which Williams claimed was merely his record label, Young Stoner Life, was actually a violent criminal street gang responsible for years of murders, shootings, and drug trafficking in Atlanta. The trial became the longest criminal trial in Georgia history, lasting over 2 years and marked by circus-like events, including the recusal of the original judge, Earl Glanville. I hope I said that right. Earl Glanville. And the arrest of defense attorneys inside the courtroom. So here are the charges. Williams, Young Thug, faced 8 primary counts, including conspiracy to violate the RICO Act, participation in criminal street gang activity, including a leadership role, violation of the controlled substances, of the Georgia Controlled Substances Act, which means possession of drugs, including THC, weed, codeine, and cocaine, with the intent to distribute, okay? And then lastly, we have possession of a machine gun and other firearms related charges during the commission of a felony, okay? So here's the outcome. After 900 plus days in jail and months of trial, the case reached a sudden conclusion of Young Thug on October 31st, 2024, when he entered a non-negotiated blind plea. The plea is that he pleaded guilty to 6 charges: drugs, guns, gang activity, and no contest to the RICO conspiracy and gang leadership charges. Now here's the sentencing. A total of 40 years. So let's stop there for a second. We can keep reading, but 40 years of his time is now given away. We start there. That's the sentence. You now give us 40 of these years, right? Okay. Woo. I don't know how you feel about time, but if you're 20, you won't be done with these people until you're 40. If you're 30, 50, and so forth. So it says he'll serve 5 years in prison, but that was commuted to time served, allowing for his immediate release. So he doesn't have to serve time inside prison because he already served his first 5. Now he has 15 years of strict probation, which is basically being in prison outside, right? And it says that he has 20-year backloaded prison sentence, and this remains hanging over his head and will be commuted to time served if he successfully completes the 15-year probation. So basically, he's going to be supervised and watched and tracked and clocked for 15 years of his life. And then if he commits anything to break that probation, they will slap 20 years inside of prison on him. So he can get to 14 years of probation and have 365 days to fuck up, and then they'll throw another 20 on top of that. So that's already 35, and then they already served him 5. So he's really looking at about 35 years just hanging over his head for 15. Woo! And so it says he is banned from Metro Atlanta for the first 10 years of his probation, except for family weddings, funerals, or medical emergencies. He is also required to return to Atlanta 4 times a year to deliver anti-gang, anti-violent presentations to local youth. Now that's confusing to me, because if you want to ban me for 10 years, but then want me to come back every 4 times of those 10 years, then I would be pretty much in Atlanta a lot, because I could have a wedding, a funeral, my little presentations 4 times, medical emergency. I could be all through Atlanta if I really wanted to. But the reason that's confusing is because how do you then mitigate any type of error when it comes to, hey, I'm here for a wedding versus I'm here for a presentation versus why are you really here when you're talking to a law enforcement officer? Like, how do you really show that? Like, if somebody says, oh snap, you're banned from here, and they start asking questions without creating a ruckus. Like, how do you mitigate the problems that may arise from that? If I was Young Thug, I'd just stay away from Atlanta, honestly. But as of January 2026, the case is now fully closed for all 28 original defendants. Most recently, in January 2026, a judge ordered the state of Georgia to return approximately $150,000 in cash, luxury vehicles, and high-end jewelry back to Young Thug, Mr. Jeffrey Williams, that had been seized during the initial 2022 raid. Williams has resumed his music career, but remains under strict supervision, including a ban on promoting gang activity or using gang signifiers in his content. So now his music is under control as well. So that begs the question of A, why do you want to use gang signifiers in your music? Is it something you can do without? Like, are you able to create an album without the gang? Like, are you that good of a musician? A. And then B, should the government be able to control what you use in your music? Because let's say it's not gang signifiers. What if it's being mean to girls? What if it's being mean to boys? What are we really allowing here when we want to ban musicians and artists on what they're doing in art? Like, I clearly he was being charged for not making art, but when we control the art, what are we really saying here, right? And so that's something interesting we can think about. And a lot of the times we think that it's not about jail time. A lenient sentence for a celebrity often includes travel bans too. So if you're a touring artist and you can't leave the state, or if the UK and Japan ban you from entering because of a minor record, your career is effectively over. Like, in the sense of trying to, work over there, I'm sure you could figure something out, right? But labels have morality clauses that let them drop you the second a judge bangs that gavel. And so for us creators, the sentence is often much longer than the time served, because you could finish this 15-year probation clean, but then we're going to still look at the fact that it's on your record, right? And so really, let's take a second and look at another case here. So without taking me off the screen, let's take this away. And then we're going to take a look at Mr. Nigel Harvey, and we're going to see how this differs really between the two cases, okay? So here we have the Georgia RICO case involving Nigel Fredo Harvey, and it was a landmark prosecution for the state, marking the first major victory for Georgia's statewide gang prosecution unit. And so here's the case overview. And this is again by Gemini. So this is a lot of different sources. They're all linked together, but this is basically an AI overview so we can just quickly get to the information, which makes AI so awesome for situations like this, right? And so it says Nigel Harvey was a high profile member of the 1-8 Trey Gangsters Bloods, right? And before we go any further, I have to stop here and just mention that's his primary occupation, okay? We're not looking at a rapper here, okay? This is not a musician. I'm just pointing out the difference between having the influence of, I guess you can say, being an artist and celebrity versus you as a normal civilian, normal guy or girl doing something similar, okay? So this is why I always pointed out early on in this YouTube channel that it's important for you, if you want to get into the music industry, to understand who your organizations are connected to, who is in your network, what is your goal for the music industry, why are you in here, and what do you want from us, right? Because if it's something like fame, money, and things like that, clearly we've shown with just Young Thug that is a lot easier to just do this for the music than it is to try to, I don't know, have some other ulterior motive, right? So if you want to specifically work in the music industry as a musician, who you connect yourself to early on matters. I don't care how you look at it, it matters. It can be a school, it can be your family. Who you connect to matters, right? And so it says, a set of the National Bloods street gang based out of Bronx, New York, with a heavy preference in Athens, Clark County, and Barrow County, Georgia, right? In October 2022, Harvey and his co-defendants, Nicholas Necco Wiseman, became the first individuals ever indicted by Georgia Gang Prosecution Unit after its creation. Now, this is the same year as the Young Thug case indictment. That was in May. This is in October. The case eventually expanded to a massive multi-jurisdictional investigation involving 17 defendants. So, the specific charges and criminal activity. The prosecution detailed a pattern of racketeering and gang activity occurring between 2019 and 2022. Harvey's specific involvement including violent crimes, whereas in August 2022, in Riverside, California, where he was accused of taking an iPhone and cash by force, drug trafficking, selling cocaine, and imitation controlled substances in Barrow County in late 2021, and weapons violations, multiple counts of possession of firearm by a first offender probationer and during the commission of a felony. And then lastly, the RICO and Gang Act, numerous counts of violating Street Gang Terrorism and Prevention Act, and conspiracy to violate the RICO Act. So one thing I do notice here is a lot of violence, a lot of drugs, but no murder charges. No murder charges. I don't see any mentions of a body or anything like that. Just robbery, like, you know, a lot of strong arming and a lot of I guess you can say debauchery. While Harvey initially faced a potential maximum penalty of 370 years in prison if convicted on all counts, he eventually reached a plea agreement, which is on July 2024, he was sentenced to 20 years with the first 15 to be served inside the prison and the remaining 5 on strict probation. So he had the reverse of what Young Thug had. Total conviction. So in December 2025, the Attorney General announced that all 16 of Harvey's co-defendants had also been convicted, effectively shutting down the gang's regional operations both inside and outside the prison system. So basically, they got all 17 of these people. But for Harvey, he got basically the inverse of what Young Thug got. And I wonder how much of Young Thug's influence affected that, because the case wasn't really handled properly. But how do we look at the convictions, right? This case was used by Governor Brian Kemp and Attorney General Chris Carr to showcase the effectiveness of the new specialized gang unit. The investigation revealed that the gang was directing hits, so there are bodies, I was wrong, trafficking fentanyl, and recruiting minors from both inside Georgia state prisons and on the streets. And so when we look at their sentences, how can we really consider what we think is common sense, right? So there actually are pretty similar cases, gang activity through and through, right? But how do we consider these sentences? A lot of people would consider the case for Young Thug to be lenient because of what they know of it. Another thing about this particular case with Nigel here is that there's actually almost no coverage of this. This has been a thing since 2022. The crimes have been happening since 2021. It involves minors, drugs, murder, and there's almost no coverage of it. I actually couldn't even find mugshots and things like that. You see people reporting on it as of 2022. I think November is the latest article, but there's almost no coverage of it. And actually, let's take a moment really quick and let's see if Gemini can actually find any coverage of it real quick. So let's see. Can we find mainstream coverage of Nigel Fredo Harvey's case? And let's just see, because I really couldn't find much information on the case other than the Georgia's state websites, and it would just seem like, you know, as big of what this case could be for the gang prosecution unit, there would be more coverage, more marketing, more understanding of like, hey, we're actually doing something good here, or maybe, I don't know. So it says to understand the mainstream coverage of the Nigel Fredo Harvey case, it's important to see it as a political and legal landmark rather than a celebrity spectacle like Young Thug's. While Thug's case was mainstream through pop culture and the music industry, Harvey's case was mainstreamed as the flagship success story for Georgia's new law enforcement strategy. Here is how the media and state officials mainstreamed the case. So the first win initiative, as we stated earlier, for the gang prosecution unit, the primary way this case hit the mainstream was through state level political messaging. Because Nigel Harvey was the very first person indicted by Georgia's new created gang prosecution unit, the GPU, in 2022, His face and name were used by Governor Brian Kemp and Attorney General Chris Carr to justify the $1.3 million taxpayer investment into the unit. So the frame was that it was presented as a new era of law enforcement. Instead of just local police, the state's cavalry was now coming for gangs. Every major outlet, WSB TV, AJC, Fox 5 Atlanta, carried the press conferences where Harvey was highlighted as the face of this new crackdown. I didn't see any videos about this. We'll have to look this up. And local media dive. So major Atlanta and regional news outlets provided extensive coverage on the 1-8 Trey Blood's dismantling. WSB TV Channel 2 ran multiple segments detailing the 136 charges against Harvey and his 16 co-defendants, focusing on the sheer scale of the crime spanning 10 different Georgia counties. The Atlanta, Georgia consultation, the AJC, positioned the case as a test of the Georgia Street Gang Terrorism and Prevention Act. They focused on the behind bars element, explaining to the public how Harvey and others were allegedly directing hits and drug sales from inside prison using contraband phones. How do y'all not know where the phone pings are coming from? Strange. I don't know how phones get in prison. That is a strange thing. Are they using landlines? Like y'all know where I'm streaming from this video. Like Mr. 3-letter organization guy listening to me right now, you know you can find me here. I don't know how inside the prison y'all don't have phone pinging technology to say, hey, this phone call is coming from a cell. Like not a cell phone, but a prison cell. I don't get it. A significant part of the mainstream reporting focused on the Georgia Department of Corrections. The case was used to highlight the crisis of contraband cell phones in state prisons. Is it a crisis? That don't seem like a crisis. The media narrative was, even when we lock them up, they are still running the streets. Well, yeah. This helped Harvey's case gain traction in tough on crime discussions across the state. National RICO trend context. So then while Nigel Harvey isn't a household name like Young Thug, he wasn't telling us to pass the hookah. His case appeared as frequent footnote in national discussions such as CNN and the New York Times regarding Georgia's aggressive use of RICO laws. That's weird. Georgia's aggressive use of RICO laws. Okay. The national reporters used Harvey's case to show that Fannie Willis of Fulton County wasn't the only one using RICO. The state level attorney general was doing it just as aggressively in smaller counties like Beryl and Athens Clark. Okay, but I was trying to figure out what they kind of meant by that as far as aggressively. Like, what are we signifying with the word aggressive? So there actually was a lot of coverage of it, but it seemed to have just kind of blown over because it was kind of like an open and shut type of situation. But that is okay with me. But let me know, what do you think? Because here's the question for you. If you were sitting in that jury, would you view an artist's influence as a reason for mercy? Like if you were sitting in the Young Thug case, right? Or is it a tool for community good? Would you want Young Thug to come back and talk to the kids? Or would you want Nigel Harvey to come back and talk to the kids? Why wouldn't you want Nigel to come back and talk to the kids and have 15 years probation? Why wouldn't you want that? Why would you want Young Thug to have 15 years probation and come back and talk to the kids? Or would you view this as a reason for a harsher sentence because they have a responsibility to the kids watching them? How do you view this? And so, is the law actually blind, or is it just checking your stream numbers? How do we know? So let me know. Drop a comment below and let me know what you want to happen in the influence gap. Do you want it to be closed? Should fame be a factor in the courtroom? Let's talk about it. And I'm out, y'all. My name is DameSmiff. I will see you. Peace.